Before beginning this new video, it's very important for us to ask you to like, to share, to comment this video. Again, this is a free content, and this is a basic retribution on what we can ask, we can expect from you. Of course, you can always have the Charles book, which is Vibrational Psychogenetics, and if you want to go furthermore, to take a direct path from theory to experience, it's very important to book one-to-one session. So the like, the comment, feel free to take the book or to book a reservation in a one-to-one session with Charles.
So Charles, what is your what's the main difference between life plan and destiny?
The life plan is the accumulation of programs and memory as soon as you're born or even before you're born, and the influence of the environment. In other words, a child who is totally new psychically reacts to his environment. He needs security because he can't survive alone, and he knows it, his guts knows it, so he doesn't know it psychologically, but he knows it. He has a reaction, a survival reaction. So his survival reaction is towards the need of security with his parents, so with his environment. Well, it doesn't matter which kind of environment. And his reactions to his environment, depending on the level of consciousness of his environment, will trigger reactions from the child. And if his environment is emotional, etc., to function psychologically, is not evolved towards systemic reality, then the child will feel insecure, you see. He will react to his environment. And by reacting, and the constants of reacting will create memory, or emotionally charged memory. That becomes programs and automatisms, see, habits. And that's the life plan. And the person will, when he grows older, he will react according to the memory, see, or the emotional charge of the memory. And it will be automatic. And that's why the person will suffer psychologically, because he reacts emotionally. See? And he reacts because of those memories, or the emotionally charged memories. The destiny is totally different, in the sense that a person starts really creating his destiny, because it has to be created, by becoming free of those memories and of those programs and those automatisms. The only way he can do that is by being conscious, or starting to be conscious of systemic reality. In other words, the mechanisms which keeps him a prisoner of his life plan. So he has to go through a process of consciousness, of meta-consciousness. In other words, a process of starting to observe in his own life, in his own experience, the mechanism, the systemic mechanisms in real time. First, he has to be instructed about those mechanisms. That becomes psychological, but still it has a certain effect on his reaction up to a certain point. But once he starts being able to observe the mechanism in real time, then, and especially his capacity of thinking, okay? Once he observes the automatisms of thoughts, then he starts living that process, which liberates him from his life plan. And then he starts creating his destiny. And at the same time, he awakens to systemic reality. Instead of being subjected to all kinds of beliefs, esoteric or spiritual or psychological beliefs.
Why is so important to be able to observe in a real time? Because a lot of people can, observe after, like, oh, I should have said that, or should have done that. Why is it so important to be able to observe in life?
In real time. Because if a person doesn't observe in real time, okay, he observes relatively psychologically. In the sense, a person, I'll give you an example. A person who will live some emotions, okay? When he lives the emotions, he doesn't know he's living emotions. He just reacts. Then after that, he will say, oh my God, what kind of a reaction I had, So anybody can do that up to a certain point. Some people don't even do that, Especially people who are sociopaths. So the person will react that way. That's psychological. He becomes conscious after the fact that he had an emotional experience or a reaction, an emotional reaction. When a person observes the mechanisms in real time, he doesn't live the emotion, or less, much less, depending on his experience. So it creates a program. Instead of nourishing another program, the old programs. That's the switch. See? That's the shift. The shift is not, I become conscious like that, and live on the fifth cloud somewhere. The shift is the fact that the person observes reality or systemic reality, or the mechanism, the psychic mechanisms which keeps him prisoner through the programs that were created unconsciously. That's the problem with the life plan, is that the child creates it, but he's not conscious of creating it. See? And the parents either. They'll just say, well, he has a bad character, or he's emotional, or whatever. But they have no idea why and how, and the problem with that, because they live the same problem. They react emotionally because they have no consciousness of systemic reality. They can't observe the mechanism in real time. That's about it.
And sometimes you can face an experience when you are kind of able to observe this, emotional thing in real time, but still be, powerless and get them. Like you will still, bring some value in it, you will say, okay, I'm under a lot of emotional thing, but as I am still, bringing some value in it, like I'm powerless to fix them.
That's a lack of experience, okay, of observing the mechanisms, and it's the results of being having a knowledge of systemic reality, the mechanisms of systemic reality, but psychologically. It takes that at first and certain instruction about that reality, certain knowledge about that reality, but it's not lived yet. It's theory, you know. It has an impact, but up to a certain point, like I said before. But once the person starts observing in real time, it changes everything. See? And a person that can observe while he's living the emotion, and he can't do nothing about it because he lacks experience. Once he accumulates that experience and other experience, and and somebody like me, will explain what's going on, then he can realize, and it helps him to finally observe the mechanism in real time. So once he observes them outside of the psychological observation, then in real time, in other words, before he lives the emotion, then he starts awakening to that reality. See? And it neutralizes the emotion. It doesn't neutralize the vibrational feeling. See? You'll still have the impact of the vibration in the memory, or the emotional charge memory. Then he gets more and more experience and starts observing in real time, and it has an impact. Otherwise, without that kind of experience, it doesn't have the same impact. That's why the person can observe that he's living, and it's a funny, very awkward feeling and realization. See, he realizes he needs those kinds of experience to realize that he's subject to mechanisms, to automatisms, okay? And he's subjected to his thoughts, or what he calls his thoughts, see, which are automatisms, which are automatic, which are mechanic. Because everything he thinks goes through the filter of his memory. It's a reflection. So it goes through the emotional charge and becomes a programmed and automatism, and then he reacts to that. That's the reaction is the forms of his thoughts, or what he calls his thoughts. He has the faculty to think, but the form that creates the thoughts are automatic. And once he can observe sufficiently and in a constant way that phenomenon, then it creates a distance, sufficient distance, for him not to put too much valor or valor in thoughts, in what's going on in his head.
And what do you mean by put some value or valor in the thoughts? It's giving some credit in it?
Well, it's giving value to it, in the sense that it's giving a negative or positive value. Once he does that, he lives an emotion, because he polarizes. So he gives credit to it. And most people, when they think, they identify to what's going on in their head. They're used to that. They don't know it's all automatic. You see? So that's the basis of meta-consciousness. In other words, as soon as a person starts to live that kind of experience of observing the automatisms of thoughts in his head, he starts liberating himself from memory and from psychological entanglement, in other words.
You meant before, when you were explaining the mechanism between the real-time observation and versus the emotion. It was very subtle, but you express something like when you are facing emotion, you are kind of neutralize them and still, taking the energy behind them. Can you be more specific between, giving some credit to emotion and be able to neutralize them?
Well, it's not, it's an after effect. The neutralization is an after effect. I don't call it neutralization. It's the effect of observing the forms of thoughts in your head, that in your mind, that neutralizes everything. In other words, you can't put value to what's going on in your head. The problem with emotion is the value that the person gives credit to what's going on in his head, see? But once he starts observing, he cannot give value or put value. That's the difference. It's not an attitude of neutrality. That's psychological. In other words, in that at that level of subtlety, you can't rely on psychological attitudes. You can't see it. Even if a person sees it a little bit, the psychological attitude is not enough. You see? And not only that, it's going to be sporadic, in the sense that it's not going to be constant. You need constants to create a program. In other words, so it becomes automatic, that you can see, you can observe that reality or those mechanisms. Otherwise, you can look at it or observe it psychologically, but won't have the same effect, because it doesn't accumulate in the same way, because it's not constant. You have to think about it all the time. See? But once a person realizes the importance of observing and where were we?
You were saying like the importance of observing the multidimensional observation versus the psychological one, because in the thanks to the consistency, like repeating the same thing, Okay.
In other words, a person that has the knowledge of the mechanisms but not the experience of observing in real time can have a certain effect, but it's temporary, and it doesn't accumulate as much or as easily as when he can observe naturally, say, without an attitude, without wanting to interfere. Okay? In other words, once he realizes the importance of observing the mechanisms, then it's automatic. But he can't realize that as long as he tries to understand all the time, because he's nourishing the psychological apparatus. You see? That's the problem with between knowledge and integration. You see? Theory and integration. You can apply up to a certain point, but it doesn't have the same effect. It won't evolve the same way. Okay? Because there's no constants. It's not the same thing, because the person has the psychological will to do something. Okay? So he has to think about it and then do it. But he's not conscious that he needs the constants, and he won't have that constants because he will use it when there's thoughts, or when he starts psychologically suffering from emotions and all that. See? But a person who realizes the importance or the value of the experience of observing in real time will do it naturally, because he realizes. In other words, there will be no psychological attitude. So it will be constant because he can see it. It's very subtle. It's not easy to understand psychologically. One has to live the experience to realize what's going on. See? The difference between psychological will and a vibrational will. In other words, once a person is awakened to that reality through integration, then it's automatic. He doesn't have to think about it. He sees it. Just like he would learn piano or, practice. He has to practice a lot. Not only understand. See? He has to materialize it. To become a virtuoso. Otherwise, and he needs that what individual who become virtuoso, which are only psychologically conscious, will develop that, will be constant to practice, because they have a longing for music, you see. So it will be easier, but they're not conscious of that. See? Vaguely conscious of that.
Yeah. Yes, they realize this kind of calling,
Yeah.
and again, thanks to their environment.
Yeah, yes. In the sense that they'll be influenced by parents or environment. They listen to music, and they vibrate to that. They, you know, they feel it. A vibration. When I talk about vibration, vibrational, it's a feeling. You know, it's a mental feeling. It can be a physical feeling, but it's mainly mental. In other words, when we talk about thoughts, thoughts are not necessarily forms. It's vibrational and then becomes form. When I talk, I don't think what I'm going to say. I just capture the vibration and talk. You see? In English, it's a little bit harder for me because I'm French, you know. So sometimes the words don't come out. See? But once, as long as I practice speaking in English enough about those subjects, then I get used to it. It becomes automatic. If I would speak English every day, all day, then I'd be fluent, more fluent.
Thanks again to consistency, you know, the repeating, like you do in music, like you do in sport, like you can do in karate or playing guitar. You need to have this kind of what we call discipline. It's hard to understand because you put something very important, which is a differentiation with, you know, the willing to. I have the will to you know, move from a psychological to a multidimensional thing, and you will not use this word. You will use you can or you cannot, you know, and it's kind of hard to from a, you know, psychological mind, because in the psychological instruction we are told to, if you have the will to, you can do it. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of weird.
Yeah. Well, it's a it's a will. It's a psychological will is always forced. You see, you need an effort. You need to. It's not natural. That's why people. Well, you have will, force. You know, you impose it. You can do it, but it's very straining energetically. You know, it will take, you know, your energy or absorb too much your energy. So you'll be tired after a while. That's why you don't. That's why psychological is very hard to be constant. What people call discipline. See? Not everybody can do it because they don't have the discipline. And they don't have the discipline because they weren't in that kind of environment. If the child, let's say, is in an environment where it's very loose, no authority and all that, he won't have discipline. He doesn't know what it is. If he's in an environment which has a lot of more authority and discipline, then he will naturally take that path. No, in other words, it'll be easier for him to be disciplined, but still it's an effort. Right? He has to force. He has to force it all the time. Even if he doesn't have consciousness of that, he still forces things. The only way not to apply force to a goal or anything like that, to will, is to be aware of the mechanisms. See? If you want to learn something, you just have to be consistent to learn it. In other words, you have to be conscious of the power of consistency or constants. Once you're aware of that mechanism, then you use it. It's easy, bit by bit. But people don't function like that. They try to impose, they want to practice for 1-2 hours, you know, and they drain themselves psychologically and energetically, you know, and they abandon it after a while because of that. But if they invest 5 minutes, 10 minutes, you know, don't force the whole thing, then gradually they get used to it and it becomes automatic. But you have to be conscious of that reality of the reality of consistency. Otherwise, it's harder, and the person discourages himself because it's psychological. It's always imposing force. That's psychological will. That's why it's hard to stop smoking, anything like that. They don't have the will.
So, is it correct to say, if you want to move from life plan to destiny, it's just a matter of discipline and consistency?
Basically, it's a matter of constance, and be aware of that, and practice. But like I said, you can do it psychologically, or you can realize and create an automatism but you have to become conscious of what's going on. You have to realize the mechanisms. You have to realize that the only way to get out of it is that way. Unless a person realizes that, he can't, he doesn't have the will to do or live that kind of experience. He can, like I said, he can live it psychologically, but it'll be sporadic. It won't be constant. That's the big difference. That's the shift of the way a person reacts. He can react psychologically, or can he react by vibration, vibratory. In other words, he will it will be natural because he realizes it. There's very little difference between the two. To a person who doesn't have the experience, it looks the same. But to a person who has lived the experience, totally different. That's the part of integration, see? A person cannot imagine what it is. He cannot imagine being free of those mechanisms, or how to be free. He has to live it to know it. In other words, he has to live the experience. And it's a certain quality of experience. In other words, a person, extremely hard for a person to go from psychological consciousness to vibratory consciousness. It needs a person who has the experience, or that kind of experience, to help him to go from one to the other, or start living that experience. Because why? Because he is used to all the time to nourishing a psychological consciousness, which stops him from liberating himself from those memories and that psychological consciousness, which is an inferior consciousness. It's a catch-22. So he needs the contact that, or a person that has lived it, that experience, to start to realize, see? To accumulate knowledge at first, and then realize or integrate. Otherwise, it's like I said, it's a catch-22. It's very paradoxal. So.
Yeah, and it's so important because a lot of people, we get stuck in our, what we call in the previous video, instruction. Like if you are only reading book, listen video, listen a podcast, you will never be able to move from this life plan to
no. It will ameliorate. It will be a little better psychologically for a while, but eventually it comes back. You can through psychological attitudes, a person, okay, well, yes, I can observe, and now that he's observing psychologically. It's that's the way it goes. That's the way it flows, in the sense that he has to live that kind of experience before, and then realize that it's limited. See, only knowledge is limited. He has to integrate, and integration is observing in real time the mechanisms of thought, or everything, So he has to observe the mechanism or the automatisms of thoughts. That's not easy. In a constant way and in real time. Only because he doesn't have the experience. So once he starts living the experience with the help of another person who is awakened, then gradually he starts to awaken, becoming autonomous. That's the goal. Okay? For him to be able to be conscious or meta-conscious of what's going on, how the mechanisms are manipulating him or try to manipulate. Basically, that's why people suffer in life, because they don't know. They have no idea of the mechanisms. They can have an esoteric idea or knowledge or spiritual knowledge about the same thing, but it's not enough. It comes from the past. If it comes from the past, then it's psychological. Nothing in the past has been, as far as consciousness is concerned, as it is now. See? And technological advancement since 100 years is the one of the factors of the awakening of certain individuals. There's different level, because there's different level of consciousness in the psychological consciousness, and the reason why is why it's like that. It's because it accelerates. Technology accelerates individual information. You know, computers, internet, everything, cars, everything is faster. So human beings are it's very hard for them to adapt. It takes a long time to adapt because they're not conscious of how to adapt rapidly. Okay? If they were conscious of, if they were consistent, then, and conscious of that, then it would go very fast. But they're not conscious of that. So it goes very slowly. And the influence of the older generation. So as long as the person or the child is influenced by the older generation, then it goes very, very slowly. He can adapt up to a certain point, but it's the information and the speed of adapting that's the problem. That's why people today suffer more than they used to at the beginning of the last century, because they can't absorb that kind of information at that speed of information. They can't adapt. So if they can't adapt, then they suffer psychologically. And they're not conscious of nothing about the system and all that. So they suffer psychologically, depression. Look at how many people are taking pills, you know, against anxiety or depression and all that. Terrible, you know, because of that.
Pills and consumptions of, you know, drugs, alcohol.
Exactly. So that why is it the person becomes addicted to those things? Because they can't cope psychologically, you know. They're stuck to their thoughts. They believe it's them. It's their thoughts. It's them. They believe their habits are their habits. Okay? But all the programs or habits have been influenced by the environment, especially the family, or the level of consciousness of the family. Same way, like the genome is transferred from the parents to the child, the genome of, or the psychogenetics is transferred from the parents to the child through reactions of the child and the reaction of the parents, and the consistency, constants of the repetition of the same kind of emotional reaction from the parents and the child. That's what constitutes the life plan of the child. So he's presented with that. He lives that, so he believes it's him. It's his personality, his habits. That's him. I am like that. Or people look at him or tell him, well, you're like that. You know, you're this and this and that. That's your personality. The personality is the programs. It's the emotion. It's the emotional charge of memory, which is transferred by reaction of the parents and of the child. So, is it you? See, it's not you. People have no idea who they are, what they are, you know, because they believe that. They're stuck to that. And they can't have distance from that. See? So that's the life plan. Once they start having distance because they live certain experience, then they start awakening to themselves, recognizing themselves. They don't need to be recognized by others, as you know, through the experience. Once they accumulate the experience, they're more centric. Whereas with the life plan, they're egocentric. Everything is centered on the programs, on the personality. But it's the programs that creates their egocentricity. It's not them. If they knew the results of that, or they wouldn't adhere, or they wouldn't believe that. They wouldn't be subjected to those programs. It's the programs that need, in other words, the habits that need to be fed. See?
What do you mean by that?
Well, in the sense that the person is always in the quest of reassuring himself, or try to secure himself. Okay? So, because of the programs. In other words, it's like the programs make him feel insecure. So he needs to secure himself. See? So he will be egocentric. That's in the sense that he obeys to the program, the needs of that are created by the programs. So if the programs tell him or influence him to be a certain way, he'll live that. He'll be egocentric. See? He will be taxed by others as being egocentric. Everybody's egocentric anyway. They become, or they liberate themselves from egocentricity by becoming centric. There's very little difference, except the consciousness of the quality of taking care of yourself. You can take care of, or you can be in delusion of taking care of yourself through programs, which you didn't create consciously, or you can be, or you can create programs consciously that will take care of yourself, but it will be more adjusted to systemic reality. See? Programs, unconscious programs, or the life plan is not adjusted to reality. No individual up to now has been adjusted to systemic reality. People adjusted to psychological perception or reality. That's the evolution. The other is involution. People that can have a sense that I'm evolving. Yeah, but you're evolving inside psychological consciousness. Very hard to define between the two. Spiritual people are inside, they think they're evolved and all that because they're inside psychological consciousness.
They are still stuck in a life plan, even if they thought that
exactly.
they have about it.
Of the upper levels of that life plan. It's a trap.
I would like to do a little focus on what you said a few minutes before regarding the impact of new technology, which is today AI. Is it correct to say that AI will make the psychological perception obsolete? Like the people will realize, thanks to AI, that they can do more with the psychological way of living, and thanks to AI, more and more of people will do the jump into the vibrational perception.
Depends, because AI right now is very psychological. In other words, the information is psychological. So to try to have answers about life, about systemic reality, with ChatGPT or any kind of other, artificial intelligence takes the information from the internet. So very little about reality or systemic reality. But I think your question is more towards the fact that people will become conscious of the mechanisms slowly because of AI. They'll ask themselves questions in the sense that consciousness, okay, or psychological consciousness is purely mechanical. Just like AI is purely mechanical. You can't, it's not the same, but it's mechanical at its core, see? Because psychological consciousness is the product of programs and unconsciously created programs. So same thing with AI. AI is not conscious of how it is programmed. And I doubt if AI will be able to be conscious of how it is programmed. See? That could be called meta AI. So a machine is a machine. A human being he's a machine when he's not conscious. He's a robot-like machine, biological machine, let's say. But once he becomes conscious, once he becomes meta-conscious of the mechanism of the system, then he awakens, he becomes meta-conscious of reality, of himself. See? Because human beings are not conscious of themselves in the sense that I'm talking about, in the sense of how it works. Modern psychology is not enough. It's within the psychological realm. See, has to shift to something else. Has to shift to systemic reality, because that's the basis of everything. It will be the basis of a new science, a new civilization. Totally. Eventually. So.
And that will be my next question. What we will be able to do with destiny? I mean, with a life plan, we are stuck. With a psychological consciousness, we are kind of stuck. Mm-hmm. But what will the human being be able to do with this possibility to making their own destiny?
It will be free. From what? From being unconscious. That's his destiny. That's the destiny. It doesn't have any forms. He will create the form of his destiny, you know. But you can't extrapolate or think about it before it happens. See, a person who is awakened, he doesn't try to learn or to extrapolate in the future in the sense of being very exact in the forms it will take and all that. He's not interested in that. He's only interested in being free from the problems of the old programs. So even a person who is awakened, he's subjected to the energy of the old program, but he can manage it because he's conscious of the mechanisms, like we talked before. He can observe the mechanism. The only way to be free of those mechanisms is to observe them in real time. Being meta-conscious of how it works, what's going on. Unconscious, a person who is not conscious doesn't know that. He can't observe it. If you have no idea or no consciousness of the systemic mechanism, you're unconscious. That's the real definition of an unconsciousness. The real definition of being conscious is to be aware and conscious or awakened to the systemic reality, the mechanisms of reality, of life.